Welcome to this episode of the Ideas Factory. I'm Naghma, and with me is Professor Harsh Pant. So we will analyze the important developments around the world on this episode, but we would want to begin with what's happening in India. India is in the middle of a farmer protest, especially north of India. We can see that the farmer protest continues and there's a standoff between the farmer groups and the government. But in the middle of the farmer protest comes a remark from the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and because of which he is the talk of he is the talk in India. He's become a talking point on Twitter. There has been a lot of backlash, Harsh. So the comment that we see from Justin Trudeau, it is being seen as an interference in the internal matters, and India has stated very clearly that it was unwarranted and it was ill-informed. But even after that, Trudeau made a second comment and again said that Canada will support peaceful protests, knowing very well that it will impact the bilateral relationship. So what's at stake for the two countries here? How is it going to affect the relations between Canada and India? And what were the compulsions for Justin Trudeau to make these comments?
Thank you, Naghma. I think it's quite bizarre, in a sense, for Mr. Trudeau to be making these comments repeatedly now, and there is a political logic to what he's doing, which I'll come to in a bit. But I think the larger backdrop, against which this is taking place, is, of course, there has been a dramatic downslide in India-Canada relations over the last few years. You may recall Mr. Trudeau's visit to India a few years back was remarkably unsuccessful because I think the whole point of that visit was, his constituents back home rather than any desire to build bridges with India. Similarly, these comments that he has made now are all about his domestic politics rather than any attempt to understand what is going on in India and to therefore position accordingly. So I don't think India-Canada relations can go down any further because of what has happened. And clearly, Indian government stand has been quite categorical. But one also has to look at Mr. Trudeau's legacy as far as Indo-Canada relations are concerned, and it's quite an unremarkable legacy, I'm afraid, because if you recall, Mr. Modi made a visit to Canada, and that was after 42 years. An Indian Prime Minister visited Canada in 2015. Mr. Harper was there, then Prime Minister of Canada, and I think a lot of ground was covered, from the nuclear deal to reaching out to the diaspora to trying to build economic ties, etc. And once Mr. Trudeau came to office, he has not been able. In fact, it's quite. It's very rare that you actually take a relationship which was doing well and to put it really on the back burner, or to really not give it the kind of importance that perhaps it deserves. Now, a couple of points here about what he's trying to do now. One, Canada is a robust democracy. So surely, I think, as a mature democracy, it should understand India's own, democratic process.
Yeah.
I have not seen anything, at least, I may be biased here, but I have not seen anything so far that tells me that either the protests have been, not peaceful, or they have been unruly, or the government's response have been that, that vicious. I mean, they have responded in a manner that perhaps, all law and order situations demand. And there are negotiations going on. The farmers are negotiating every other day with the government. They are sitting at the table. So I don't really understand what is the target here, because clearly any democratic process goes through this, goes to these kind of situations. You have a bill that was passed by a parliament, and there are affected constituents who are unhappy with it. Now they are raising their voice, which is their right. They are protesting, and the government is trying to assuage their concerns to the best possible way it can. So clearly, in that mix, if you try to make a case that somehow this is about brutalization of the farmers, or this is a process which is undemocratic, or somehow India is taking positions which are different from other democratic governments that have, that they have been taking. That I think says something about Mr. Trudeau's priorities, which seems, and as your question indicated, more about domestic politics, where Sikhs clearly play a very, very important role, and Liberal Party, Mr. Trudeau's party, is very, sees Sikhs as a very important part of their vote bank, and certainly, therefore, his desire to raise these issues can be politically understood, but you know. What is, I think, a bit
So
problematic here is
yes.
that he has completely kept the any attempt to mend Indo-Canada relations after his disastrous visit aside. He seems not interested, and I think Indian government has indicated that they are also not interested if he's not.
Yeah, we've seen the first big fallout. India has skipped, the Canada-led COVID meet that was to take place. Though India has not said that it's because of this, but clearly Jaishankar will not be attending that. And at the same time, Harsh, we know here clearly Trudeau is indicating that his domestic policies are guiding his foreign policies, and he doesn't care much about the relationship, the compulsions that his domestic politics put him into a difficult place. But Canada has been opposing the MSP in WTO, and that's what the ruling party has been pointing out, that there is a double standard there. And in fact, after Trudeau's statement, we've seen that there have been protests in front of the High Commission there, the Indian High Commission, and the whole Khalistani element coming in. So it's creating a difficult situation for India.
I think it does, and we know the history, we know the background, that that the secessionist movement of Khalistan had a great support at one point in time from Canada, and Canada was seen as one of the most significant bases. In fact, even today there are voices there, which continue to advocate for this policy, and India had raised its voice repeatedly. You have had government officials who have made their priorities clear. You would recall how few years back, the then Canadian Defense Minister came to India, and Indian Chief Minister of Punjab refused to meet him because he argued that he's a Khalistani sympathizer, and that led to its own sets of consequences. So clearly, I think in India there is a lot of sensitivity on this issue, and the way Canada has rationalized it, saying, look, this is all about freedom of expression, and then going round and round, we believe in united India, but we also believe in freedom of expression. I'm afraid it doesn't cut much ice with significant sections of the political establishment in India, and this is across political spectrum in India. You have had strong reservations from Captain Amrinder Singh, Congress Chief Minister in Punjab, and of course the ruling BJP. So clearly there is a sense in India that Mr. Trudeau and his party are clearly not interested in elevating a relationship that India actually invested in 2015 when Mr. Modi went there. So I think after that, if the response from Canada is this lackluster, then I don't think India would have any interest in taking it any forward. But I think the other point that you have mentioned is equally important, is the kind of hypocrisy that you see in this whole engagement, that you are not really looking at the concerns of smaller and marginal farmers in this country, and responding to a very elite set of farmers sitting in Canada who are all very well established, and they all have lands here in India, and perhaps that's the reason they are putting pressure on Canadian government to respond. But clearly this is something which which I think Indians and many in India and Indian policymakers would also take cognizance of, that on whose behalf are these statements being given, and is there a greater degree of understanding about the Indian agricultural context in Canada, with the kind of positions that Canada and some other countries also have taken in WTO. And also remember that how subsidized agriculture is in most developed countries, and how some of the most significant opposition and significant demands for reforms have come from these countries in the past. So I think there is a lot of hypocrisy going around in the responses, but Canada has really taken it to another level, whereas other countries are muted. Other countries have not taken official position on this. Yes. You have also seen, for example, a number of British MPs writing to the British Foreign Office. But British Foreign Office has made a statement saying that law and order in dealing with protests is something that Indian authorities have a right to deal with, have a right to engage with. So clearly, Canada has decided to up the ante. And I think there is also there
Absolutely.
must be a realization that perhaps they are not that India is not important, or that building relations with India is a second order.
Yeah, it shows a total disregard. And like you said, Canada decided to up the ante, and the relationship has taken a further hit. And Trudeau has reiterated, made these comments at least a couple of times. So that, of course, is very, very unwarranted, and India has responded strongly to it. Now, there's another point that I would like to touch upon, Harsh. We've seen that, the outgoing intel chief, Trump's intel chief, John Ratcliffe, has made a comment and has in fact warned that China poses the biggest threat to America since World War II. Now, this is not the first time that a top rank official has sounded off, about the threat of China, or has called out China. But how different is it this time? Do you see this is a call to action, a dire call to action? Because much has changed in China's, the perception, the world's perception towards China. Now, he's said that China is seeking global domination. And there has been a number of, or a variety of espionages, including economic espionage, which has probably gone up. The FBI has said it has gone up by 1,300% in a decade. So when we look at John Ratcliffe's remark in this context, how serious is this warning? And what does it really tell about the times to come when the new administration takes charge? What are the kind of challenges vis-a-vis China that Biden will face?
I think clearly there is a growing consensus in Washington. It seems now that this is an inflection point. It's almost a question of now or never, and the kind of rhetoric, the kind of statements, the kind of official documents that are now either being prepared or coming out. This indicates a level of seriousness which we have not seen in the past. What is also interesting is the change in discourse. Recently, Bill Clinton made a very interesting statement saying that, look, China under Xi Jinping has really altered this. Has created a new set of challenges for the world and for the U.S. And this is Mr. Clinton, who himself is responsible for the integration of China after the end of the Cold War more substantively into the global economy, and has been one of the most biggest votaries of China's, of a more integrationist policy vis-a-vis China. So I think the mood has changed. The mood has soured on China in Washington, and I think with these kind of warnings that are coming out from the outgoing Trump administration, I think there is an attempt to make it very clear to the incoming Biden administration that that don't go all weak-kneed when it comes to China. And so I think that there's a marker that is being laid down as the new administration enters into office, and as the new administration defines its priorities as to what will be the benchmarks around which the Biden administration's China policy would be decided.
Yes.
And Biden administration has also indicated that they are ready to look at the China question in a very different light today than it was in the past. And I think we know, for example, from the writings of people like Jake Sullivan or Anthony Blinken, that they are also looking at China through a very different set of lens in the last 2 to 3 years than they had done in the past. So my sense is that this consensus, which the US intel chief once again underscored, is related to multiple dimensions of the China question that are at play. It's not simply a question that here is a superpower that is rising, but the challenge is that an alternative great power is rising, which is fundamentally different from the kind of experiences that even during the Cold War you would have had with the Soviet Union, because it is integrated with the American economy. And the whole idea of strategic decoupling, economic decoupling, is a very difficult one if you are looking at it in the short to medium term. How do you decouple from your largest economic partner in a short time? And so the trade issues, the technology issues, the issue of strategic engagement in various parts of the world, They are important. The issues of global governance are important. The way China has manipulated global institutions is important. And America, by, I think, in a sense, withdrawing from these institutions, has also allowed China free play. So the challenges are significant, and it's not readily evident that there is a clear roadmap here
Yeah.
to manage this transition. And perhaps these warnings, these documents that are coming out, one of the most significant ones being the State Department's document on China, which recently was released, which was reminiscent of the famous George Kennan telegram, which dealt with the Soviet threat and containment. And I think all of that is sort of laying the groundwork for a Biden administration to map out its own China policy in light of what the dramatic transformation that has happened in the last 4 to 5 years. So again,
But
I think Mr. Biden recognizes that this is not going to be Obama 3.0. This will have to be Biden 1.0, and one of the biggest challenges would be how do you deal with China.
yes, absolutely, new set of challenges. But John Ratcliffe has been criticized earlier, Harsh, about probably creating a false narrative by insisting that China is a greater threat than Russia. And how do we look at that? I mean, if you compare the Russia and the Chinese threat, a lot of Democrats have criticized him about this earlier.
Well, I don't think that the question about China and Russia, even in Washington today, is being looked at as who is a
bigger threat,
the larger threat, because clearly those who understand the strategic consequences of China's rise really look at China as a major problem. Russia is a problem in a certain context. Russia is a problem, in the larger Eurasian landmass, geographic space, and that Russia challenge has a different connotation, especially under Trump, because it was seen that it was Russia influence. Many had argued, although again without any evidence, that which brought Mr. Trump to office. So if that was the case, then I think that Russia question had become entangled with the larger domestic political issues in America. But China question is a much bigger one. It's a much more strategic one, and I think that clearly now is backed, in terms of how that it will be defined and how it will be mapped out by both Biden administration, and it is already being done by the Trump administration. So my sense is that Russia question will linger on in terms of the domestic politics.
Yeah.
But with Mr. Trump moving out of the fray, I think Russia question will lose its salience, and greater focus perhaps will now be on China across the board. And many senior Democrats are already pointing in that direction.
But China continues to create problems for India as well. In the middle of the face-off that continues in eastern Ladakh, we now see that the construction for dam on Brahmaputra River is taking place, and India says that it is watching it very carefully. But what are India's concerns here, really? Because China will be able to control the water in times of drought, in times of monsoons, so the volume of water that it can control, it can be used as a political weapon with this dam that's being constructed in near Arunachal Pradesh, around the LAC. So what are India's concerns here?
Well, I think, the Brahmaputra, the water issue has always been very, very important for China. And in some ways, to use water as a strategic weapon seems to be becoming a regular feature of Chinese politics. And the signals are very clear that this is something that China would like to do. Now, if you contrast that with India, India has, despite some debate in the country, India has refused to use water as a weapon, even against Pakistan. And there have been big debates on Indus Water Treaty, for example, and we have not done anything so far. So clearly, India believes that resource governance, water governance, is an issue that perhaps should not be weaponized. But with China, it's another issue that we have seen getting weaponized. We have seen being used for strategic purposes, for geopolitical ends, and this latest debate on, or latest revelation or latest policy idea that has come out from China about the new dam certainly signals that China intends to do it at a much bigger footing than it has been doing. And China certainly has been looking at diverting water from Tibet towards its own water deficient areas, and that is something that China has done for ages now. but they have been upping the ante, and water issue perhaps will feature much more actively on the menus, on the agenda, than it has been doing so far. So I think uh, again, as India says, we will have to watch very carefully, though I think the official position of India will remain that when you are a lower riparian state, you have to be very careful, and the upper riparian states have a responsibility of engaging with them and trying to find a solution which is not unilateral. But with China, I think, given what has happened, much should not be expected. And unilateralism in its foreign policy, in its strategic policy, is now is now par for the course. I think we should get used to it, and deal with it with very clear eye, because I don't think that they're going to budge on this question, even if we start having a conversation with them at this point. So I see that this is going to be another challenge going forward, but a challenge which I think is now well recognized in India.
Absolutely well recognized, and the threat that we were talking about, or the threat that the outgoing intelligence chief has been warning of, that China is seeking global domination and is trying to do that in many ways for different countries. This is affecting India. It is going to affect Bangladesh as well. Now, finally, Harsh, just a quick comment on the new faces that have been named in Biden's team, and especially Neera Tanden, who's been named as a director of Office of Management and Budget, and there are two more women, Janet Yellen and Cecil. So all these women in the top economic roles, and also what does this economic team mean for the business leaders? Does it really is an indication that America will be lifted from the current economic doom? What does it signify, these appointments?
I think these are all very accomplished women who have been at the forefront of economic policy in America, and the economic policy discourse in America, and they are. I think it's wonderful to see so many women taking major positions. I think this was something that Mr. Biden wanted to do, to showcase his ability to bring diversity to cabinet positions. And I think all of these women will certainly will reassure American markets, American investors, and other stakeholders in American economy that there'll be greater stability in economic policy making. The only, I think, person that has generated a lot of controversies is perhaps Neera Tanden. And it is interesting that she's generating controversy from both the progressives in the Democratic Party and the conservative Republicans. I think she is seen as someone who is very, very aggressive on social media. She apparently at one point even punched a reporter who asked certain questions to Hillary Clinton on Iraq war. And she's seen as someone who is very close to the corporate sector. So the progressives see her as everything that is wrong with the democratic establishment that has been very closely working with the corporate sector, with the much to the disaffection of the middle classes and the lower classes in America. And on the other hand, you have the conservatives that have targeted her, for her tweets against certain senior Republicans. So I think she's generating a lot of controversy, and I think at this point, a nomination would depend on what happens in Georgia. But in Georgia elections, runoff elections that will be held in January. So clearly, but again, she's a very accomplished policy person, and it would be interesting to see if she gets nominated. Of course, if she does, then she becomes the first woman of color and first Indian, South Asian to get that very important office of management and budget. So some interesting appointments there, and I think. The trajectory of Mr. Biden's policy is becoming clearer by the day. Though it is also interesting to underline that Mr. Trump has not yet officially conceded, but I think I think we're beginning an American administration in transition.
Absolutely, and with this current economic team, you're saying that there is optimism.
Yes, I think
Yeah,
so. I think they look very, because they are all very, very
yeah,
accomplished. They are all very, they have been
sure.
in the policy business for
So,
long. And I
mhm.
think it gives a reassurance to not only America, but also to the world at a time of great economic, convulsion in global economy.
Absolutely. So, on that note of hope and optimism, we come to the end of this episode of the Ideas Factory. Thank you so much and see you next week.